EcoStep. This is the final project for Environmental Perspectives. I am Eric Marshall, and this is my presentation. Nature Preservation in suburban Las Vegas, Nevada. Sunset Park is in suburban Las Vegas, Nevada. The park hosts several areas within it, but the one we will be talking about is the Dunes Discovery Area. Dunes is a habitat for several of the native species of Nevada. It actually is what Paradise Valley itself looked like before it pretty much got colonized. Okay, so how did Sunset Park come about? Sunset Park was founded in 1967 and contains the last dunes that used to cover the entire Paradise Valley. The land was given in a grant to the county by early ranchers in the valley and comprises a total of 324 acres, of which 214 acres have been developed as a park. The undeveloped 110 acres will be the focus, as this is largely comprised of undeveloped natural habitat. Hence, what trails run between it. Why the interest about the dunes? The dunes are the last remaining of their kind in Paradise Valley, and a final bastion for many of the native species of the valley to call home. As such, the environment in the dune area itself including the trials themselves, impact the native environment. So, what is the problem? Some of the things people do are just plain nasty. The problems are twofold. The first problem that we'll discuss is the issue of trash flowing into the park or being left there by guests that ends up entangled with bushes. The second we will discuss is the willful disregard people have about leaving their domestic animal excrement behind when they visit the park. The starting problem with trash. Trash in general is a nuisance, and there are entire industries geared towards disposing of the unwanted portion of our modern commercial lifestyle. Confidently, I can say that people aren't bold enough to litter directly within the park itself. The issue stems from the fact that wind is blowing debris into the park from outside sources. Las Vegas, Nevada can be an exceptionally windy place. The wind is also more than willing to carry small bits or light objects long ways and deposit them against a windbreak. The problem here is that the windbreak happens to be the naturally occurring bushes in the Dune Discovery section of Sunset Park. The problem with wind-blown trash is that bushes in the dunes are doing nothing wrong, nor is anyone in the park directly leaving trash. So what can be done? The erection of a more substantial barrier around the dune side of the park would prevent more of the heavier trash from entering the park from the adjacent area by trapping it against a fence. Stressing to nearby business owners the importance of having trash containers with secure lids and closing those lids after trash is taken out cannot be understated. The ecosystem of the dunes is rather sensitive, so considerations of removing trash must be weighed against the impact that entering the habitat to remove it. Consideration should be given to the park experts and therefore should only be done under guidance with proper instruction so further damage is not done. An increase in biodegradable products would also reduce the impact, but even if the material is biodegradable, it should still be properly disposed of, not left to drip into the park or stream. Because even though an item might be biodegradable, it still wouldn't have a place in the natural habitat, because it would introduce additional outside resources, stresses, and other things like that that could be harmful to the ecosystem of the park itself. People tend to bring their dogs to the park. I will personally reflect that I have nothing against dogs themselves. I have owned several over my life and had to maintain them and deal with the various hazards and joys of owning a little four-legged friend, but I have limits. Those limits begin and end when I must deal with the waste of other people's dogs. Part of this issue is a matter of comfort, and part of it is a matter of safety. Lastly, it is a concern of the environment. The issue is not so much the fact that dogs are brought, and as a result of being brought to a park, do very dog-like things such as relieving themselves. The problem stems from owners who fail to clean up after their pets. And really, when I started researching this, I was extremely startled by the various things that are actually in dog excrement. There are apparently a lot more hazards to canine feces than merely stepping in it. One of the key articles that I used that I then stemmed out from was a study done by the University of Bari, and it was published on the National Institutes of Health's website, and it linked it to several fairly severe biological threats and hazards within the environment that really can be avoided. And like the quote here shows, the presence of resistant bacteria in an urban environment may present a public health hazard which requires control measures by competent authorities. That's a quote taken out of the article, taken out of the paper itself, which was done by the the nice folks at the University of Bari. And it covers the various strains of bacteria and other forms of pathogen which were found inside of domestic canine excrement and the hazards that will present to society. About who really should be responsible for this, the people who are bringing the dogs to the park themselves should be the ones who are responsible for cleaning up the messes of their dogs, but people tend to be jerks given some opportunity. Not everybody, it only really takes a couple though. Very much in a free rider kind of experience. Well, it's both tragedy of the commons and a free rider consideration because you have people who will clean up after their dogs and an agreement that if they're allowed to bring their dog to the park, they're expected to clean up after it. You have people who are able to bring their dog to the park because it's expected they'll clean up after it, then they don't. So, free rider because you have people who are abusing the fact that they can bring their dogs to do their business in the park, and you have the tragedy of the commons because you have other people who see other people letting their dogs go and not bothering to clean it up, and that kind of increases the problem. So, three of several various pathogens you can find in dog excrement are the enterococci, which is a rather nasty form of bacteria which commonly causes urinary tract infections but can also be responsible for any number of infections. One of the strains which is actually prevalent in the canine feces is the Encoccurus faecium, which has shown very significant resistance to multiple drugs. And that is bad. I go into this a bit later in the presentation, but there's a given expectancy that the antibiotics that we currently have will provide X amount of protection and aid during their lifetime as a drug. And the more of these drug-resistant bacteria get around, the shorter and shorter that window becomes. Where in which if we go into a hospital because we are suffering an infection, there will be less and less that you can do to actually counter that infection as more and more bacteria become resistant or immune to the antibiotics that we use. Another issue that you have with animals in general, but domestic dogs and livestock in particular, is parasites. So one of the parasites is Toxocara canis, which specifically occurs in dogs. It's a specific type of nematode parasite that transmits through fecal matter. And one of the issues that you have with this is it's capable of latently transitioning into several other host animals in between, and it's even capable of infecting but not reaching maturity in humans. Although even though it can't reach maturity in humans, it can still cause severe damage to young children, adults. It can even cause blindness and death in certain uncommon cases. But yeah, there's really no reason to be leaving dog feces lying around where people can end up trotting through it, and especially in a habitat where it can cross into another species and be transmitted through society in general. The largest danger from the leavings, the bacteria and other pathogens left by domestic canines are entering into a fragile ecosystem while also being spread to other people that visit the park. Streptococcus aureolus, don't really know the pronunciation. Latin, it roughly translates to golden sphere, and it gets this name predominantly from the fact that it Under the microscope, it looks like a golden ball, but also when it infects a host and is showing symptomatically, it forms a pustule that is full of a golden pus, which is where it gets the nomenclature of the golden dome because of the type and shape and color of the pustule that it forms during an infection. Streptococcus is a very common infection that people get when they go into a hospital, and it is, along with the other one of the strains of bacteria that is becoming increasingly resistant to antibiotics. Yeah. This is a clear and alarming vector. A vector is any path that a disease or pathogen can spread. And pathogens cause disease, but not all disease is a pathogen. Some of them are genetic. But in this case, the pathogens are being transmitted through a public vector that can be completely avoided if people would just pick up after their dog. It can be exceptionally dangerous in the consideration of parks because the elderly and you even have immunocompromised populations that enter the park are being exposed to this biological hazard within the park. So this is a very clear incidence of tragedy of the commons. Several samples of the Enterococci were shown to be highly resistant E. faecium strain, like I said earlier. The spread of such pathogens can shorten the amount of time that the current generation of antibiotics will be effective. And this goes off of the perceived expectation that if you go into the hospital and your doctor prescribes you with antibiotics, that when you take the antibiotics, they'll actually have an effect. The desired effect, of course, being to kill off the pathogens which are causing undesirable conditions within your body. And the consideration of having these antibiotic-resistant bacteria strains that have been shown to infect humans negatively, as in to the overall detrimental health of the organism, not just being noxious stomach flora or helping you pull more fat out of that Snickers bar, but to the point where we have infections that we won't be able to treat with penicillin, erythromycin, or any of the other various antibiotics that we're currently using. There will be a point where even our advanced medicine, as it currently is with the antibiotics we have, won't be able to fight these things. And as a result, you can even expect to see human population die off as these resistant strains displace the other normally existing strains. So, what can we do? There exist two solutions. The owners need to pick up after their pets, always, which they haven't been doing. So the likelihood of the tragedy of the commons reversing itself just because people have a crisis of consciousness and decide to always clean up after their pet, we're kind of already past that point because it would have been an issue if they already were. Radio ads are possibly the best way to inform people of the importance of picking up after their pets, because then you can also introduce a kind of social peer pressure of it, especially if you inform people that there's a hazard to leaving discarded canine feces in a park. The park might have to take on more of the responsibility itself. And after researching all of the various things that end up in dog feces, I would significantly suggest that there be specialized training to the removal and disposal of this hazardous biological waste, as I put in bold there, as it would not be consonable to expose an average park worker to such a workplace hazard without proper training. It really wouldn't be good to take it from being a biological hazard and turn it into a cultural hazard. That kind of would defeat the purpose. So the timetables. The timetables are a bit difficult, especially with the trash. The first step would be removing the trash already present in the park. That would just be like an initial cleanup. The second step would be keeping the amount of trash below a critical level. So that would just be your spot checks, and you could start that after you got done with cleaning up the initial trash. It's just one of those things that you would have to balance the ecology of entering the the preserved area against the impact that that the trash has on the area. So you'd have to travel in there frequently enough to not damage the environment of the habitat, but at the same time travel in there frequently enough to remove the trash that would damage the environment of the habitat. The third step would be erecting an external barrier to reduce the amount of trash able to get into the park. That could probably take months because of the whole approval and government planning and everything else that it would take in order to keep trash from drifting in from an outside location. Contracting, the money raising, that could significantly take months. So the second step would be really critical in preserving the environment, while the third step would take quite a while to get into place. The final step would be a social campaign through various forms of media to educate the people on how to keep trash from entering their local environment through safe disposal methods. That would be closing the lid on your trash can. That would be ensuring that when a restaurant throws something out, that they do it in Tide bags, and that the dumpster that they throw it in has a proper working and functioning lid, so that once it gets into the trash bin, it doesn't come back out until it goes into the garbage truck itself. That would need like a cyclitic campaign. You'd have to constantly keep reminding people that it's their responsibility to keep their neighborhood clean. The main hold rules for the trash would be people unwilling to actively be responsible for the trash because people honestly just don't like taking out the trash. They don't like dealing with the trash. They completely prefer throwing it and forgetting about it. The dog messes are going to be a bit harder. The dog mess is a more critical issue because of the kind of confrontation that might be needed. Dog owners being specifically instructed, go back, pick up your dog's mess. That's not fun. People get defensive when they're accused of something that they perceive or is perceived as being wrong or mean or unruly. So confronting people about leaving their dog's mess behind is not really fun. But it's one of those tragically common things. Social peer pressure is good, but people who decided not to pick up their dogs probably aren't probably going to like somebody else getting on their case about them not picking up their dog's mess. The immediate removal of the mess may not be possible due to the health hazards associated with the waste. Like I said before, after learning all the various pathogens that are in a canine's feces, I would suggest that people are very well educated for it and that the health and hygiene for them to take care of themselves after they've finished the task of cleaning up the dog's waste needs to be present before they seriously do it systematically, because like I've said before, it doesn't really make sense to trade the biological hazard for a cultural hazard in the workplace. Sad to say it. People really should just pick up their own dog's mess. I hesitate to suggest creating laws which will punish leaving dog excrement behind, but some people only learn when it hits them in the wallet. Fines, penalties, being barred from being able to go to the park. Stuff like this would work. Social peer pressure would work better, I feel, because then you have to deal with the regulation of the imposing the fine. You have to deal with the court costs, the court fees, the processing costs of implementing the law, of enforcing the law, of punishing people under the law. Peer pressure to behave better might just work better because it's easier to implement and it's easier to enforce. Some people will just shove off and ignore what the people around them say, though, so some people will only accept it when it starts hitting them in the wallet. Hurdles are always going to be the people more intent on not cleaning up their own animal's mess than in the opinions of others. So there's always going to be the people who really don't care what you think about them, just letting their dog do their business. In their mind, it's probably more convenient for them to get nattered at for not picking up after their dog than picking it up themselves. And here's just the references. Toxocariasis is the medical name for the infection of the nematode parasite. Toxocariasis, this reference here actually refers to both the canine and the caddis strand of the nematode in question here. This is the main paper that I stemmed off from. And there's the end of the Thank you for your time.